virtual IJB board meeting. Derek has started the recording because it will be posted up on the council's website after the meeting, because we have to hold these meetings in public, and the recording enables us to meet that statutory requirement. I'll ask Derek first of all to do a roll call so we know who's all here, please.
Thank you for that, Chair. I will do just the roll call in the order of the members. If the members can just indicate their presence by indicating yes, please. Councillor Duncan?
Yes, here.
Luann Grugan?
Yes, but
I know I can see you, it's just for the benefit of the tape. Councillor Al Samurai has indicated her apologies. We have Councillor Cook as a substitute.
Yep, I'm here.
Councillor Bell has indicated his apologies and there is no substitute for him. Councillor Dunbar, please.
Yes, here.
Kim Cruttenden. Alan Gray.
Present.
John Tomlinson.
Yes.
Sandra MacLeod.
yes, here.
Alex Stephen.
Yeah.
Caroline Howarth.
Yes, here.
Chris Littlejohn has intimated he will join the meeting around 11 AM today and offers his interim apologies. Mike Adams.
Yeah.
Jenny Gibb.
Hi there.
Hi, morning. Jim Curry.
Yes.
Graham Simpson.
Yes.
Maggie Hepburn.
Yes, here.
Shona McFarlane.
Yes, here.
Alison Murray.
Yes, here.
Howard Gemmell.
Yes, here.
Jess Anderson from Legal has intimated her apologies, as has John Forsyth. We should be joined by Kundai Sinclair for Legal.
Hi, good morning. I'm here.
Good morning, Kundai. Thank you. Chair, that completes all the registered members. We do have other people in attendance today, including Aberdeen City Council Chief Executive Angela Scott, and there's the report authors are also present as well. That completes the official roll call, Chair.
Thank you, Derek. Thank you. Just in terms of managing the business, it would be helpful if you want to speak in on an item, if you could use the hand button. It's easier for me to keep track of it that way. Derek or I will also keep note of comments in the chat, but I think the first place we'll go to indicate if somebody wants to speak is the hand button. It's not possible to tell who stuck their hand up first, unfortunately, so I'm afraid I'll do my best to keep an eye on it and keep people in a fair order. But my apologies in advance if I seem to overlook you for someone else first. So we'll get on to, anybody have any declarations of interest for any items on the agenda? No? Okay. We're taking one item of exempt business, that's item 15, which is the supplementary procurement work plan. And we move now on to the standing items. The first one is the minute of the board meeting of the 12th of May. So I'll take this for accuracy page by page. So page 5. Leslie.
Hello, there's I think it's item 5, you know, about the resumption of the clinical and care governance. I just wondered about why it's not on the agenda for today. You know, because we've said that, you know, it would resume. There's usually a reporting back, you know, on from the meeting to here.
Yes, of course. So the minutes usually come to this meeting. The minutes aren't available for this meeting. I think probably we put out the papers. The clinical and care governance was last Wednesday, wasn't it? Yeah. So the papers probably the timing probably didn't work out for the meeting. But I'm very happy to have a summary report from you just now, Leslie, if you have anything that you'd like to bring to everybody's attention.
I suppose the main item really is around the data exit report that was provided and the care home report, which we've asked for a follow-on report to come to the meeting. The next clinical and care governance will be on the 28th of July, I believe. So there'll be a continuation report, essentially, I think, giving us any progress and some detail around the situation in care homes.
Okay, thank you for that. Does anybody have any comments about the clinical and care governance issues that have just been mentioned? We'll have the minute of that meeting for our next IJB meeting, as we would normally expect. Leslie, you've still got your hand up. Is there anybody else? No, okay. That's for page 6. Thank you, Leslie. Page 7, page 8. Right, so we're content to approve the minutes then. Right, thank you very much, everybody. The next item is the business planner.
Chair, just before you continue, can I interrupt? Just to remind all participants that this is a recorded session, so that if you leave your cameras on, you will feature in that silhouette shots as gets published at a later date, just for your information and awareness.
So if you're gonna wander off or obviously look at your phone, turn your camera off. Okay, right. The etiquette of these meetings is still something we're all getting to grips with, I think. Right, the next item is the business planner. Alex or Sandra, do you want to talk us through this? I know there's been some changes. We felt it was very important to have this item at this meeting so we get a sense of future business as we go back into the normal round of governance on our business.
Hi, Chair. Yeah, it's Alec here. I'll come in on that if that's okay. So we've done a little bit of work with Derek on the planner as it sits at the moment. There's a couple of bits that we need to, that we're moving into the next meeting. But you'll see in here some of the meetings that we've actually categorised in yellow, or a kind of ambery sort of orange. They'll be the ones that will come to the next future meeting of the IJB. So most of these reports are in a format that we'll be able to bring these quite quickly. Therefore, if later on in the agenda the IJB agrees to have a meeting in August, then we would be looking to bring these reports to that meeting. The rest of the reports in that section are on the agenda today, and I guess the other reports within there would fall largely into the September meeting if they're not agreed, but there'll be further review of that as we go through the process. So very much so that we're starting now to get back into that reporting cycle. I know there's been some teething problems whilst we've been getting there in the move from response into recovery, but certainly we're working our way through that as it sits at the moment, and hoping to refine the information. But I think what we're looking at now is too much information going to the one meeting, which is why we're looking to potentially put another meeting in and take some of the information there subject to IGB approval. I hope that's okay, Chair, and that's enough of an information, but I'm happy to take any specific questions on the planner.
Okay, thank you, Alex. I see John Tomlinson and then John Cook first, but I noticed Derek had his hand up. Is this an administrative point, Derek?
No, it's an error. I've hit the wrong mouse.
That's fine. Okay, so John Tomlinson first, then John Cook, then Luann, please.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I think we're looking to bring the RAP committee back possibly in September, but I think given the timings of IJBs and that, we'll ask Alex to make sure the timing is appropriate given the August and September timetable.
Okay, thank you for that, John. John Cook?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that the I mean, clearly in the current circumstances, we accept there's always going to be some slippage. But I think the idea of having an August meeting so that things don't get unduly delayed is a good one. And certainly on the Teams meetings I've been doing, on planning committee, for example, and they're probably taking 50% longer than you would if you were doing it in a room, simply because people are having to work out the technology and concentrate. It's just taking longer. So I think having very long agendas will basically fry your brain and not conducive to good decision making. So I think slipping in an extra meeting seems to me to be an entirely sensible idea. That was all.
Okay. It comes up in the mobilisation, the financial report later. So that's when we take the formal decision to have a meeting in August. Luann?
Yeah, it was just a task really for ourselves, for Chair and Vice Chair, that recognising as we're now moving back to a more sort of planned reporting cycle, that we will now look to align our board development sessions with these agenda items so that we have that good lead-in that we've already agreed is really important. So we'll take that and work that up after this meeting.
Thank you. Okay. Anybody else? Would you take your hand down if you've spoken, please, so I don't get too confused. Okay, I don't see anybody else. I don't want to preempt the decision that we'll take later on about an August meeting, but I fully agree with John Cook's comments that it's important that we don't have agendas that are too long. And I'm glad to see that we'll be catching up with business and we'll be picking up the normal cycle again. So I think this is a very encouraging report, and I look forward to the discussion later on. Luann, do you want to come back?
Sorry, no, I've tried to stand down.
Okay. Right, so we'll note the business planner. Next item is item 6, and it's recovery, Operation Home First. Gail, is this you speaking to this?
Yes, I'll speak to this paper. So this paper provides an update to IJB around some of the activities that have already taken place as a result of our initial response to COVID. It's true to say that COVID's presented many challenges and unfortunately many sad outcomes, but it's also created the opportunity to respond at pace and to minimise the negative impact. And it's helped us to fast track many of our plans that were already in place as part of our strategic plan. It's also helped us continue to build on our strong relationships we have with partnership partners, the council and the NHS, and we've very much moved in a joined up way to swiftly do what we need to do to minimise the impact and improve outcomes for people where we can. So we've empowered operational staff to make decisions. We've streamlined some of our governance to ensure that it's as effective as possible, and we've moved together with a common purpose. So a lot of these things have resulted in very positive outcomes. So we've really fast-tracked our use of digital technology, for example, and that's meant that people in our communities can receive a lot of the health and social care support that they need without putting themselves at risk or having to go into the traditional places that they would have to go into. But we're now starting to see a pull towards other ways of working. So we need to take stock and help embed the changes that have taken place. And it's important that we give these things time to embed so they become part of our new ways of working. So the 4 chief officers across the northeast of Scotland, so that's the 3 chief officers of the Health and Social Care Partnerships and the chief officer of the acute sector in NHS Grampian, have come up with Operation Home First, and that's what this paper covers. And it refers to the current, that's our second stage of the ongoing response, and our early steps towards recovery. So we've got a unique opportunity to embed the transformation that's incurred. It's important to recognise that the changes are still fragile, so we need to take the time to allow them to bed in. The report shows how these changes align with our strategic plan, and we're recommending that IJB note the approach and priorities around the current stage of response and recovery, and note that we'll bring a further report to a future risk audit and performance committee and a future integration joint board, providing progress on Operation Home First and information about our next stage priorities in our recovery process at that time. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Gail. Right, questions and comments from people, please. Leslie, I see you first. and then John Cook.
Hi, I've got a few points actually. First off, about that there's, it's saying in this report there's no financial implications. Secondly, about the what Gail referred to as streamlined governance. I raised some concerns last week at the clinical and care governance around, what this might mean for us going forward. I appreciate there's a lot of work happened in a very short period of time, and I do think that officers have to be commended for the work that they've done. However, I think governance has an important role here as part of the whole process. So I'd like to hear a bit more about what streamlining actually means, because it's very brief in the document. And also about, I don't know if there's a link here to what I'd raised earlier in terms of, I know it's saying about a report coming to the RAP committee, but whether there's also potentially some tie-up with what's coming into clinical and care governance on the 28th of July and beyond.
Chair, will I maybe just come in there on the financial bit? So I think the report says there's no financial implications arising directly from this report, because as it sits at the moment, there isn't, the decision that you're being asked to make will not have any financial implications, so to speak. But there will be financial implications of the new way of working going forward, and that's certainly something that we'll be looking to bring back to a future meeting of the IJB.
Gail, do you want to come in?
Okay, I'll respond to some of the other points that were raised by Councillor Dunbar. So in terms of the streamlined governance, the decision making has been within the remit of officers in terms of the decisions that have been taken, and we've streamlined that by empowering our operational colleagues to take the decisions that needed to take at the time. And we also have a revised streamlined process around our formal decision making through our executive programme board, which now meets on a weekly basis to consider what's required, as opposed to previously it would have met on a monthly basis. We also have a daily leadership team huddle, which allows for quick decisions to be taken, as well as feeding up through our partner governance processes where required as well. You also asked around tying in with what's coming to clinical and care governance. I think that's a good point, and I'll certainly discuss that with colleagues to make sure we're bringing the right information to clinical and care governance, as would be helpful there.
Okay. Can I come back on that? Is that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so still, I maybe need to take the discussion offline, but I'm still not entirely, I mean, I understand the need, well, the shift, if you like, for governance going to operational staff at the moment, but it's more about, is there going to be a shift back, or how will it work in future going forward?
Well, the recommendation
says that'll become permanent.
No. I think when we're talking about governance, we're talking about governance across both operational and strategic. So Gail described the streamlined processes that the operational side has put in place for COVID, with the huddles and the daily and the weekly meetings. And we are stepping back up the strategic governance to have the full cycle of IJBs, with additional IJBs actually, probably, clinical care governance and RAP. So, and the recommendation does say, note that a further report will come to RAP and to integration joint board meetings once decisions have been taken about the future shape of these services, which is exactly how it would have been previously. So actually the strategic governance processes are not being streamlined and are not changing. It's the operational governance that has been streamlined a bit. And I think officers, it's clear officers are very keen to keep those faster processes, with people feeling more empowered to make decisions. I think we're in danger of focusing just on our role, our strategic governance role here, but it's a much wider issue about governance for these changes.
I appreciate what you're saying. It's just that I am aware that sometimes, like operational changes, and like in terms of governance, can lead to strategic risk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would be expecting you as chair of clinical and care governance, John as chair of RAP, and myself as chair of the IJB in our regular discussions with officers to determine the agendas, to be checking what the strategic risks are of the operational decisions that are being taken to make sure they do get escalated up to the formal strategic governance meetings. That's our role as chairs of these committees, I think.
Okay.
Right, we've got John Cook next, and then I see Luann, did you have your hand up? And then Sandra, please.
Yeah, thanks. It was really around the issue of reports coming back to RAP and to IJB. I just wanted to get some feel for what the kind of timescale for that was. I think Gail made a very good point that you need to allow time for things to be embedded. So I guess having reports coming back too frequently is going to tie up officers' time in just writing reports and actually won't tell you very much. But I just wanted to get a kind of sense of what the timescale might be.
Okay, so the current programme we're in at the moment is a 12-week programme, which started a couple of weeks ago. So that'll cover June, July and August. So we will start preparing a report to come to IJB. So that might be September or maybe the next cycle after that, depending on how long it takes to pull everything together. And the same with the RAP committee.
No, that's helpful, thanks. And just other couple of comments are, I think it's, given that we are in unprecedented times, which, sorry, it's an overused phrase at the moment, but I think we need to have some kind of flexibility and the need to be able to tweak stuff as we go.
I think last week at the workshop, I think the assumption was that you were going to have 12 weeks to do this work and then to come back in that cycle. So that would fit with September. Right, I think we have Sandra, do you want to come in just now? Is that?
Yeah, please. Actually, just to help clarify a couple of points, I do appreciate the points that Councillor Dunbar has raised about, you know, and that you've emphasised, Chair, regarding that this is at a strategic level that the IJB is stepping up. But I would just really, and I'm sure everyone is aware, but remind that we're still actually very much in response phase within the partnership. We have not moved on to recovery phase. And the paper that we're presenting today is just about allowing our staff and the time to understand the changes that have been put in place by the wider system, and particularly about the health board powers and things that have been put in place in a lot of their response to COVID and how that will then impact. So do appreciate the fact that we'll bring papers back, but this is about an embedding time while we still remain very much in a response phase. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. I think I have Luann and then Mike Adams. Is that correct? And then Leslie, do you want to come back in?
Thanks, Sarah. Well, Councillor Cook's asked the question about timings. I think it is really important we're clear about when we'll get reports back on that. So that's really helpful. And I do think it's a sensible approach that's being proposed, that we take a breath and we look at a new starting point for transformation. My question's around our mental health services, and I'm just wondering if the same approach that's described in this report will be used for our mental health strategic redesign as well.
Gail, do you want me to come back on that? Yeah, so sorry, Luann, the mental health is part of our system. It is part of that whole thing. Yeah, okay. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, good, thank you.
You have Mike Adams next.
Yeah, sorry, just really needed to make a couple of comments. The timescale and the 12 weeks are the embedding in things that have changed already. The taking a breath with this is not just to see if these things actually work over a longer period of time, but actually give staff time because they have been running full pelt. And although NHS Grampian is doing a lot of work around the start of the recovery bit, it is very much still a command and control situation, and it is still reacting to an ongoing situation. Because the staff governance bit is the most important bit for me within this. And and any tweaks being suggested for that at any time would actually be gone through our normal processes and policies, just to make sure we don't want to get carried away.
No, yeah, I think your point is well noted, Mike. Yeah, the staff governance processes haven't been amended by COVID. We have Leslie coming back.
Hi, I think I'm getting some assurance in fairness today. I think it's more just, it's obviously an emerging picture. I take on board what people are saying, particularly, Sandra's point about that we're still actually in the response phase. I suppose it's just, I do have some concerns about the extent to which we'll get out of response phase. Given if there's going to be second surges or whatever that's, like being flagged up through the press, I suppose.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that you're feeling a little bit more assured, Leslie. That's good. We have John Tomlinson.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, it's just really a comment that I found the report very helpful, and the discussion we've just had on process is helpful as well. So I'm reassured as chair of risk audit and performance, and I think in some ways it's been quite a good model, this, in that we had some informal input prior to this report. We're seeing this report, it's almost like we're now getting clear where the touch points will be for us as a board and through the committee, and then people can get on and do the job around that. So just one question around it. I'm assuming that when this comes back, we've got the 11 transformations here and 8 principles, and there may be other things which come up as well. But on each one of these, we'll see how they link to our strategy or suggest any tweaks to the strategy, plus what the outcomes and impact will be, and then how they'll be delivered. So I'm assuming that's what will come back when we see some of the detail at the 12 weeks. Just is that correct?
Yes, so one of the things we're doing is mapping all of the activities we're doing to help embed them against our 5 programs of transformation, so in terms of demand management, prevention, digital data, etc. So we'll be able to see what actions we're taking in order to embed, and we're developing a data suite so we can measure or demonstrate the impact it's had in relation to a number of data streams, all aligned with our strategic plan.
Thank you.
Right, thank you. Leslie, you got another comment, or your hand's still up? No, Leslie? I think she might have frozen, having technical issues. Okay. We'll move on, and hopefully Leslie can get her tech sorted out and rejoin us. I don't see any more comments, so we've got recommendations on page 15 of the pack. So we've been asked to note the approach and around the current stage of response and recovery. I'm being told that there's a lot of interference on the call, so if people can remember to put their sound on mute when they're not speaking. It's probably me, actually. I've been forgetting to do that, but if we can remember to mute microphones when we're not talking, that would be helpful. So we're noting the approach and priorities around the current stage of response and recovery, and we're noting that a further report will come to future risk audit and performance committees and integration joint board meetings, providing progress on Operation Home First and information about our next stage priorities in the recovery process. So we're content to agree those recommendations. Right, yeah. That's good. Great, thank you. Okay, we're on to item 7 now, which is the primary care update. Is Caroline?
Yes, great, thank you. I hope everyone can hear me. So thank you very much for allowing me to provide the IJB with an update on the changes to primary care services throughout this COVID pandemic. I really enjoyed listening to Gail's introduction there of her paper, because actually I could mirror exactly what she said in terms of primary care, and that the sort of change, the rate of change that we've had to put all our services through, and with that the changes that patients have had to cope with, but also the opportunities that have been provided by this pandemic and the learning that we can take from those. So the paper gives you a little bit of a summary, hopefully, around the highlights of what we've changed, some stuff about the method of delivery, increased use of some technology that we've embraced. It talks you through some of the sort of current and planned changes, a little bit about the COVID hub work that we've been involved in, and also an update on the other contractor services. So I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Caroline. So I see John Cook.
Yeah, thanks for that. Couple of comments, a couple of questions. I think the move to total triage is good and greatly to be welcomed. I think the greater use of IT is greatly to be welcomed. Caveat on that one: are we sure we're okay with looking after the folk who are not necessarily IT literate? They may be, it may be because of age, or that's terribly age. It doesn't mean that there are 90-year-olds who are better at IT than I am. It could be age, it could be poverty, there could be other reasons why people are not as good with IT as some others. So we could have some assurance around that, just to make sure that those folk are catered for.
Yeah, so I wasn't sure if you were coming in with another question, but yeah, absolutely, very, very much on our radar. And also, it's been a real eye-opener in terms of exactly what you're saying. We have had plenty of 90-year-olds who have embraced the new technology. In fact, it's not really been necessarily a poverty or an age thing. Sometimes it is just the IT, no matter how much of it you've got. Sometimes we have come across problems. So we're definitely not looking on this as the only route into primary care. This is a route in where people find it helpful and more efficient. In terms of visiting, we've got some devices that can be taken out to patients who can't use the technology. We've done that. Certainly with the COVID activity, we've actually brought the devices to them where they don't have access to them. But yeah, another front door, but not the only front door, and very much on our radar.
Thanks, that's helpful and reassuring. And I had a question on the table on page 24. I'm trying to look at it on my iPad at the same time as doing this. Are the figures there cumulative, or because when I first glanced at it, I thought they were, but then some of them seem to be going down from. Yeah, no, I actually don't think mine's very small. I don't think they are cumulative. I think this reflects the rollout. So when we first really rolled with this, it was only the doctor surgeries that got access. But over the number of weeks, we've had it rolled out to nurses, optometry, all different services, sexual health. So I think, although I didn't provide the table, I'm pretty sure that this would be a reflection of additional numbers each week as it's rolled out more and more. And this is going to be an unfair question if you didn't do the table. Well, it's a national table, but yeah. Because I was looking at the week 11 NHS Grampian figure, which says 2496. Week 11, yeah. Yeah, but in the paragraph 3.2, it says during the week of 26 May, there were 273 near-me consultations. Undertaken in general practices. Yeah. It'll be that. So that would have been the general practice ones. Yeah. And the fact that there were sort of 10 times that is because it's a whole bunch of other providers as well. Yeah, all of that. Okay. All of that. And actually some of them, to be fair, will also be training as well, because every single time we have a new service, we have to do some training. So there'll be an element of that as well. But thanks for answering your own question.
Got John Tomlinson and then Luann, please.
Okay, Thank you, Caroline. It's a really helpful report and see some of the tangible changes that there are. What would be very useful is to also, if there's any indication yet around any shifts from the public end or the patient end. This gives a very good picture from the end of the lens from the service provider and how it's being done differently. And I'm wondering if we're getting any initial feedback from the public in terms of them shifting their approach to managing their own health, etc. within that. So that's one question. And then the other one is just around care homes. And there was, a few weeks back, some indication that GPs were not attending care homes or dealing with them differently. What's the position now in relation to them assisting in the care homes and how they do that?
So in terms of your first question, I don't think there's been any formal public involvement or feeding back in terms of how they are finding the service. But I guess there's just the anecdotes, which I know they do speak volumes, but all practices are undertaking triage at the moment, and all patients are getting phone calls back within the 24 hours. So I guess we haven't seen any significant increase in terms of complaints. I would only know about my own personal practice and the salaried service. So we haven't had anything back in terms of that, but it's a very valid point and something we'll be looking at going forward to make sure that we are meeting all the needs of our patients. In terms of the care homes, you'll see in my report we talk about level 2. The general practice has moved to level 2, and in that it stopped the need for GPs to go in regularly in person, but they have absolutely not stopped providing rapid access to their services if care homes need it. Most practices, if not all practices, are providing virtual ward rounds, so they'll meet using the Near Me technology or some form of virtual, or even if it's a phone call to discuss any patients they're concerned about. And also have been very involved in terms of authorising swabs and such like for the care home residents. And we've got where it's a COVID patient or a patient with possible COVID, we have our visiting teams in the city who would be going in to see those patients, and where it's not COVID related, the GPs or their team are still very much going in to see the patients. We've also got a bit of geriatric input to some of the care homes, just still doing tabletops and being available for accessible by telephone if necessary.
Okay, thank you. That gives good assurance. And on that first point, and it's just obviously there's good feedback here from people who are using the new technology, but there'll be people who are unable to use it, as has been mentioned, and we'll just have to keep an eye out for what's happening with them and how we enable their access. But thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, Luann, you next.
Thanks, Sarah. 2 questions, Caroline. One, you may not be answered. It's about the table, the Near Me table, and I see there's a column for third sector of use of Near Me, and I just wondered if we'd been doing that in Aberdeen City. And I suppose I'm thinking about the importance of pathways and how good that would be if we were involving our third sector in use of that technology from a pathway approach to health.
I don't know the answer to that. I know that our link workers have been using it, so I know that much, but I don't know any. Maybe someone else knows more than me around that.
I could come in on that, Sarah, Chair, if that's okay. So yeah, interesting. We had a conversation around about that very thing this morning. So what we're finding with providers, we have regular huddles with our providers, both in care at home and care homes across the system. That's our third sector as well as our private and independent sectors, and they're carried on a regular basis. We also had an exercise on Friday where they joined us, and what we're finding is that the use of near me with technology and things. It's not, as I think someone indicated earlier, it's not the volume of technology they have, it's a connectivity. So we're actually using that, and it's some of the providers are not really well placed to their connectivity issues that they have are not supporting that. So we are looking at multiple ways of starting to try to address that and take that forward to then have a whole system, a whole joined up approach in how we can support providers regardless of their source with being able to use technology. So it's something that we are aware of and are addressing.
Thanks, Sandra. Can I ask a second question, Chair? My question is really about the health debt, and I see in item 3.4 we're talking about chronic disease management. Some of that's been stepped down, and the screening programmes as well, as we know, which was a national decision. I'm just looking for a sense of what's been done now to mitigate some of the potential health debt that's been acquired, and how are we building a picture of what that is, and so that we can respond as effectively as possible as as we move through the different phases in this situation. I know it's a big question, but I think it's really important. I'd just like to hear what the thinking is around it at the moment.
Yeah, so you're right. The chronic disease management has, I would say, changed rather than stopped.
Okay.
So it's very much, each practice will have been going through everybody who is due their review, because everyone is, some people will have been lucky to have not needed a review in the time that we've been managing things slightly differently. But for those that have been due a review, they'll have been looking at them on a person-by-person basis, and either providing them with an extension to their medications if they're stable, or a telephone contact or near me. And some will still have had their bloods done. You know, it's about giving care where it's absolutely needed and can't be delayed. So for someone, for example, who's got unstable diabetes, their review will not have been stopped or pushed, delayed. It will have happened. It just may have happened in a slightly different way, with some bloods and then a phone call rather than a face-to-face. So each practice will have been mitigating its own risk in terms of who they feel is safe to move forward to a different review date. Does that answer your question, or was there another bit I've forgotten about?
I suppose it's just the wider screening programmes and the potential of the health debt that we haven't we haven't reached those people.
Yeah. So as you say, those were national decisions. So the only one that's actually performed in primary care is the cervical screening, and we're waiting for guidance on when that can be restarted. But yeah, national decisions, just waiting for the go ahead for that to start again.
Okay, thanks, Caroline.
Jenny, I see your hand next.
Thank you, thanks. Caroline, it was item 3.6 that I wanted to ask about with regards to the green zones for the shielded patients. And I was interested in an update on the progress around if there are any challenges regarding screening the staff, and just generally around the patient flow through the buildings, and I don't know, things around sort of how will patients travel to and from the green zones as well. It was just to get a little bit more detail around what's happening there, please.
Yeah, the green shielding zones have taken up quite a lot of our time over the last few weeks, and for all the right reasons, and it is all around about process. So I guess just for the benefit of everyone else on the meeting, the green shielding zones are a Grampian plan. So the same conversations are happening in Shire and Murray, and the patients will go to one that is the most convenient for them. First of all, if they can travel by their own transport, then they can come to a shielding. We're absolutely not expecting a patient who would rely on a friend who they don't live with, or public transport is an absolute no-no. These patients would be seen at home, because otherwise they're not shielding. So they are allowed out for medical appointments. So you would only be coming in if you had your own transport. In terms of the flow, so the buildings, and we've got a number of different options, but all of them have got different entrances in, different entrances out. We've identified nursing staff. Some are coming from primary care, some are coming from secondary care. Some nurses lend themselves very easily to this type of work because they maybe have some occupational health reasons where dealing with patients who are shielded would be considered a safer environment for them for their own personal health. In terms of them being screened for COVID and for you know, swabbing and such like that. That hasn't been part of the discussions till now. But as you know, things change every single day. And I'm not going to say that isn't going to be put forward, but at the moment, the patients are shielding. They're coming from a shielded house into a shielded car into a shielded building with staff that have not worked that day with anybody who is not shielded. So it's as safe as you know, as we can possibly make it. So that's the sort of processes. That's where we're at with it.
Thank you for that. Luann, I see you again. Right, do we have anybody else? John Cook, back in again.
Thanks, sorry, it is one I forgot to ask earlier. It was just the issue around the dentistry, as mentioned on page 29 of the pack. I just wondered, out of curiosity, where are the 2 emergency centres, and are they being well used? Are they treating people just occasionally? Just kind of get a sense of volume of demand.
I have absolutely no idea the answer to either of your questions, because although it's part of my paper, I didn't write that section. So I don't know, maybe someone else on the line knows, but I genuinely don't know, unless someone here has had a dental reason to go to one of them. I'm unclear where they are. I'm really sorry.
That's okay. It was just one of the things that occurred to me as I was reading through the paper and thought, yeah, where are they and how are they being used? But if you don't know, you don't know.
I'm sure they are being used because they're talking about needing more space, so they are being used. I just don't know where they are.
Okay. Providing patients can find out, I guess that's the main thing.
Okay, we'll find that out and we'll put it round and get it put in the minutes, but we'll circulate board members. Derek can send a note out about that. I don't see anybody else. Any final comments on this paper? Okay, we were just asked to note it and we have done that and we've commented. So thank you very much for that, Caroline. Right, I'm mindful of time. I should have mentioned at the beginning that the auditors are going to join us at 11 a.m. and we're going to have to take items 12 and 13 at 11 a.m. We've got just over 10 minutes to go though, so I think we can probably get through item 8, which is the grant to the independent sector organisation.
Just to say, it's KPMG, Michael here. I'm ready when you are, so no rush. We'll take the paper when you get to it.
Okay, are you happy just to sit in until we go through the business as usual then? Are you?
That's fine with me.
Okay, right, we won't mess the agenda then. This meeting's complicated enough to do without chopping and changing the items. So thank you very much for that.
No problem.
Okay, right, so we've got item agenda 8, which is grant to independent sector organisation. Hello, Anne, over to you.
Hi, morning everybody. Yeah, so I'm hoping that the paper is reasonably self-explanatory. Basically, what we're asking for is that, or the paper sort of lays out a funding request, a continued funding request for a grant to Scottish Care to continue to work with us over the next 3 years to work at the interface between ourselves and the social care sector, independent social care sector. A similar paper came to the board earlier on the year to continue our funding with ACFO to support the third sector social care providers. So the paper outlines our funding request, or the funding request, also outlines some clearly identified pieces of work that we would be working with Scottish Care, asking Scottish Care to continue in our work with them. I think this is an improvement on the previous request that had come in a few years ago, which didn't actually see their work aligned to our strategic intent, whereas now I think that it is much more clear. It also asks or makes clear that Scottish Care there's a requirement for them to provide us with an annual report of the progress against those clearly defined work streams. One of the things that I would like to add as well is that obviously there's been a recent focus on the care home sector, and Scottish Care as a national organisation have been quite prominent both in the media and the press as a lobbying organisation, and sometimes seem to be at odds with the direction of the partnership and actually with what we're trying to do with our social care providers. So I have asked for some clarification from them about, and some confirmation from them that they understand what it is we're trying to achieve through this commissioning process. So just for clarification for everybody, the part that we commission is actually the Partners for Integration part of Scottish Care. So Scottish Care has two arms as an organisation. It has an arm that's quite a lobbying arm, and it has the providers for the Partners for Integration. Partners for Integration actually hosted by Scottish Care. So it's that element that we're actually commissioning for. The local team are very aware of the potential for confusion, but just to reassure the board that they are fully committed to working in partnership with us to achieve the aims outlined within the paper. One of the good recent examples of some of the work they've done has been to support a collaboration of providers who've come together to purchase PPE as a collaborative. That's a massive step forwards for those people who aren't familiar with the sector, for a group of providers to come together and to work collaboratively over something. And Gosha Duncan from Scottish Care, I think, should be commended for the work that she's done with them. She's worked tirelessly with them to find the best rates, the best suppliers, and actually those supplies are now coming into the city. And they've also, I suppose what's good with that is, it's not just been the independent sector, but they've also worked with third sector organisations across care at home and care homes. So I think that's a massive step forwards for and a good example of the way that we would want to work with them going forwards in the future.
Thank you for that, Stan. Yes, I think that's the more that people can work together, the better, particularly on PPE issues. So I'm glad to hear that. So I saw John Cook first, then John Tomlinson, then Leslie, please.
Hi, yeah, thanks. It was just a very brief one in terms of paragraph. If you could expand on paragraph 3.3 where it says, sorry, I'm doing that thing where I'm looking at the papers on my iPad simultaneously with doing the call. Yeah, we say in the paper says they've delivered on the broad aims of the business case since 2017. I wonder if you just expand on that a wee bit.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's what I was alluding to, really, that the previous submission had sort of come through at the time when we had an integrated care fund, and the submissions and requests for funding weren't necessarily strategically aligned. So the broad principles of that was to work with the partnership at the interface between ourselves and the independent care sector. I wasn't in post at that time, and I think certainly over the last, and this isn't down to me, but certainly from a partnership perspective, our thinking in how we work with the social care sector has moved on significantly to being more of a collaborative approach. So I think if you take that essence into account, us working with Scottish Care and then working with providers, has really moved us on. I think one of the examples has been asking them to facilitate a providers network, say, for example. So working together with ACRO, they've been instrumental in starting to pull providers together into a forum that actually we use that forum as it suggests as an interface, and we take our key strategic challenges and work with providers around that. Equally, I think they've been around a lot of our discussions about how we pull together the new care at home contract. So they've been working with providers on one side, but also working with us on the other. So they're kind of like have been the glue that's held both of our thinking together, if you know what I mean. So I think if you can take that's what I'm saying, it's the broad principles of the previous submission, which was to work at the interface between the partnership and the social care sector, then that's absolutely what has done. In terms of measurement and impact, that's probably been a little bit more difficult because we weren't very specific with what we were asking them to achieve. Whereas going forwards, and that's what I'm saying about the annual report, we will actually be able to get them to report against the different items within that paper.
Thanks, that's helpful and reassuring.
You're on mute. Sorry, Sarah, you're on mute.
Yes, I'm not now, and my landline's gone off, thankfully.
Okay.
So over to you, John.
Okay, right. Yes, thank you, and that was helpful in your further explanation as well. So I'm very happy to support this proposal. I just would like some clarification around, I think it's at the top of page 37, Programme 5, where you're talking about developing the market position statement. So I'm assuming that's across the independent sector and the third sector. And so my question just simply, because COVID might well have some implications on that going forward. Just what's your anticipated timing to come back with the output of that?
Yeah, thanks, John. So it had been March, and we had a drafted ready for March. But unfortunately, as you say, COVID has sort of taken over, and yes, we'll absolutely have to revisit that and make sure that it's fit for purpose going forward. So I don't have any anticipated timeframes, but it's not unreasonable to suggest that wouldn't be towards the end of this year.
Okay, that's fine. That's quite quick in the circumstances, I think. Yeah, thank you.
It will be a draft for consultation. I would imagine it will come here first.
I look forward to seeing that draft in the IJB later on. Have Leslie and then Luann, please.
Hello, Anne. Thank you for your report. I think I've got two parts to this question. It's about at 3.6 in your report, you talk about, the risk, the kind of ongoing risk of market failure. And what I wondered about was, if there's going to be a kind of new and wider role for Scottish Care, will it also include, what kind of support and liaison, that they might provide to providers? And the other part of my question is to do with, I saw some statistics last week about, the transmission of infection in care homes being greater when there's more than like 10 residents, and whether that, the impact of that in terms of, providers.
Okay, so in terms of support, I can give you a recent example if that helps. So over the last couple of months, Scottish Care and ACBO have been working together almost to continue the provider network. It's been a provider support group, and I think within that they've been trying to work with providers to understand some of the challenges that they've had. So one of the challenges that Sandra was speaking about earlier was about connectivity within the residential care sector and how that might compromise how we go forwards and their support to people. So actually what they've been trying to do is to help to understand what that is. So sometimes it's not just about the infrastructure, but it's about the confidence that the teams have to use the digital means of connecting with people. So I suppose in terms of support, I think that's the way that Scottish Care can get into the nitty-gritty of the detail with providers that not, from a commissioning point of view, we wouldn't necessarily get into. And I think Gosha, working with them to get PPE, not being able to access PPE has been a recent threat to sustainability, because actually if people haven't got the right things to wear or right equipment to wear to provide care, then they can't provide care. So that's a really, really important thing. And as I say, Gosha's been working very closely with them, on an operational day-to-day phoning round suppliers perspective so that is a very supportive approach. Again, one that's completely appropriate for them to do, because providers are independent providers. It's that, they need to continue to procure, not, it's not for the partnership to do that for them. So I'm not sure if that gives examples of where they've been supporting and the kind of things that we would want them to do. They've got you'll see in the paper something there around workforce as well. So, you know, working with our lead nurse around the, you know, sustaining a nursing workforce sustainability where it's appropriate in care homes is something that we're asking to do for the future. Does that answer that question?
Yep, that's good. Thank you.
Okay, and in terms of the transmission of infection, I haven't had access to that information, but I guess maybe that's what John Tomlinson was speaking about our market position statement. We will have to take all of these factors into consideration going forwards in the future about how we deliver services, but in a way that now sort of COVID is one of the predominant factors of our consideration about how do we provide services in an environment where we know that, you know, at the moment we have to keep people at a suitable distance, and we have to provide the right environments for them while still acknowledging that it's somebody's home that they're living in, so that, you know, that absolutely their quality of life is of paramount importance.
Thank you.
If I can come in with my question, I think, Anne, you've touched on what I was going to ask about, but I'll ask anyway, just because I think it's an important aspect. It's about value for money in this grant. So just want to hear a bit more about what measures are in place to make sure that this grant delivers value for money for the partnership, and particularly to ensure that the spend is actually spent locally for the purposes that you've outlined in the report.
Yeah, no, thank you. So part of getting that understanding was that conversation about you know, ensuring that people are aware that this goes to our local ambition and delivery rather than going to the wider Scottish Care. So I think it was really helpful, the conversation that I've had, that, you know, clearly describes that there are two arms to this. Yeah. So we have absolute assurance that this will go locally, and in terms of value for money, you know, I think that's within the monitoring. So that's what I'm suggesting, that, you know, we've got a clearer plan of work to take forward with Scottish Care, so we will be able to judge that. You know, even I suppose some of it might be quite hard to quantify, because, you know, it might be that the value for money is about making the service the providers more sustainable, which then reduces the risks of us having to step in as a partnership and provide support. If you think about the PPE, for example, you know, pulling those people together and looking at much cheaper costs, you know, for quality goods, that's been a significant piece of work, which, you know, in the grand scheme of things, we wouldn't have been paying for the PPE, but it adds to provider sustainability. So I think it's a hard one, you know, to absolutely sort of say this is what we spent and this is our monetary gain, say, for example. But I think we can describe the gains in an indirect way through the work streams that we've asked for. Even just thinking about if we do something which means that we potentially could reduce agency costs within the provider sector, that, you know, that's a good thing from a workforce perspective, but also I suppose from a provider's, gives them a bit more financial stability.
Thanks, Anne, really helpful. Thank you.
Chair, could I add to, sorry.
Yeah, I'll just say something quickly first, Sandra, then Jim Curry. But I mean, it occurs to me that one of the proofs of success of this partnership with Scottish Care, because that's what we're asking for really, is that providers want to come and provide services in the city, because that has been an issue in the past. This is cementing the relationships, and providers are more likely to want to stay here and provide. Right, Sandra, you next, and then Jim Curry, please.
Just to really support the conversation, the response that Anne has given, and in response to Luann's question, the value for money has been an absolute driver for us. I think we've worked together. Anne has done an exceptional job in really holding Scottish Care to account for initially what was a large sum of money, and we weren't actually getting a lot of our performance aligned with our strategic planning. There has been recent conversations, as I'm sure you've seen, people will have witnessed in the national press, that what's happening at a local level in Aberdeen City is not necessarily reflective of some of the conversations that are happening at a national level. So we've really been explicit about what we're expecting, and this is a funded position to help us move forward, but also to help support our providers. So it is, we're absolutely clear this is not lobbying. And I think, as Anne describes, therefore, that we are expecting to get some really good value for money, and particularly how we move forward with workforce and provision, and helping us move that forward with a contractual arrangement. But we're absolutely clear and will hold to account Scottish Care with regards to that value for money process.
Thank you, Sandra. That's very clear. Jim Curry.
I think possibly the last couple of answers have maybe addressed my point a little. I was wondering to an extent why we are paying Scottish Care. Are we paying them to do something that they should be doing anyway as a representative body of care providers? Shouldn't they be doing these sorts of things? Are we paying them to present their case to us? But I suppose I think that some of the answers from Sandra around the value we're getting possibly negates my comment. But I'm just it's about making sure that what we're paying for is something that really is of value.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you'll notice that the costs are also reducing over the 3-year period, and that's because, you know, as we go through, you know, over the years, we're developing deeper relationships between providers and the partnership, you know, ourselves, which is part of the reason about, you know, for the reduced costs. But I do think that distinction between the two elements of Scottish Care is what we need to you know, hold on to, is the fact that we're not paying for the lobbying part that the providers would expect them to do on their behalf. What we're paying for is for capacity to work at the interface between ourselves and the providers to make sure that we meet all of the things that are outlined in the paper, and to move us into hopefully a more sustainable position within the independent care sector.
I'm just wondering, are we doing anything of a similar nature to help third sector organisations? Yes,
and that's why I paid reference to that. So we took a similar paper to the for approval. It must have been about January this year. So we also fund ACFO as third sector interface.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Thank you. I don't see any new hands up. Luann, have you got another point to make? Okay, right. Thank you, everybody. I think that's a good discussion. Thank you, Anne, for your very clear answers to the questions. Our recommendations are on page 34 of the pack. So we're asked to approve the expenditure of up to £394,371 over a total of 3 years to provide grant funding to the independent sector organisation. And we're being asked to make the direction at Appendix A, and we're being asked to note the key focus of attention expected by the independent sector organisation during this time, and the opportunities that this offers to the partnership strategic aims and transformational activity, which is the discussion that we've just had. So we're content with those recommendations? I see some nods, that's good, thank you. Just check with the auditors that you're content for us to proceed with the next couple of items before we get to you.
Yes, that's fine with me.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're on item 9 now, which is the service user representative on the IJB. So, Howard, I think you've probably got an interest to declare in this, have you?
I suppose I do. I didn't really think of that, I guess.
Okay, if we can note that in the minutes. And yeah. Right, Alison, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So this paper is really just formalising the situation that we're in at the minute. And in relation to the service user representative on the IJB. You'll be aware that we have 2 carers representatives and 1 service user representative on the IJB, and their terms of office all expired technically last March. And in conjunction with ACFO, we undertook a recruitment campaign for the 2 carers representatives, and it had been our intention to continue thereafter with a recruitment campaign for the service user representative. However, the approach that we took with recruiting the carers representatives in conjunction with ACFO was fairly lengthy, deliberately, because we wanted to ensure that we met with as wide a group as possible and had discussions with them to ensure that they understood their role on the board and what they were letting themselves in for, basically, before they decided to put themselves up for that. And that was all prior to the kind of formal application and interview stage. So you'll be aware that our 2 carer representatives were identified and were introduced to the IJB early in March and participated in their first full meeting towards the end of March. COVID then got in the way of us progressing with the service user representative, and rather than let the existing situation carry on for too long, we wanted to come back to the IJB this morning just for confirmation that you were content that we extended the term of office for the service user representative, and that we would undertake a recruitment campaign later on in the year when we're able to do so more comfortably with all the social distancing requirements. Ideally, I think we would have preferred a two-year extension, but between discussions with the chair and with Howard, the current incumbent, there was an agreement that the extension would be to the end of March. So we would be March next year, sorry, March 2021. So we are proposing that we just confirm that extension officially, and that we will commence a recruitment campaign towards the end of the year and present to the IJB in March next year a candidate, a service user candidate for a 3-year period. And that also has the benefit of us not being in a position that we have to recruit both the carers and the service user representatives going forward. So we'll have that staggered recruitment campaign, which hopefully will give us a bit more capacity, and we won't be in this situation again. So I'm happy to take any questions on that.
Thank you very much, Alison. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, John Cook, please.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm perfectly happy with this, with the substance of the recommendation. Just the paper says that Howard's term of office officially expired in March 2019. Could you just give us a bit more of an explanation as to why a year later we're doing this now?
Yes, so all 3 terms of office expired last March, and we were just a little bit behind with the recruitment, and as I say, it took us a little bit longer, and we didn't, because we are in this situation now, we didn't want that unofficial situation, if you like, to extend any longer. So we felt the time was right just to bring you up to speed with where we were at with it, and just get that official confirmation of an extension for the service user post.
Okay, I'm happy with the substance of the recommendation.
Thanks, Dan. Howard.
Just a sort of comment on it, and that over the period I've been on it, which is actually a very long time, I always was a little bit uncomfortable about just who I was representing. And so in terms of the recruitment, if I remember rightly, was done through the PIN, the Patient Involvement Network the hospital. Am I right about that originally? So perhaps a little thought as to how perhaps a similar sort of exercises you did with the carers, maybe a bit more thought as to how, I mean, a way, I think because I have quite a wide background, perhaps I was quite a good representative, but I think perhaps a bit more thought into somebody who represents maybe slightly more widely would be a useful use of the time between now and when you start the recruitment.
Exactly. Thanks for that, Howard. I think it's fair to say we're in a very different situation now than we were back in 2016 when we were doing the initial recruitments. We're a bit more aware of what the partnership's all about and the type of representation that we need on IJB, and exactly that's the approach that we took with the carers, and we would take that similar approach with replacing yourself as a service user representative. So thank you for endorsing that. Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wants to come in on this?
Yeah, Sarah, if I could just to say I'm happy to endorse this extension, and thanks to Howard for agreeing to stick with us for a bit longer. He's really been a really important member of the IGB along with our carer reps, so I'm really pleased to see you sticking with us, Howard. Thank you.
Happy to help out.
Agreed. Thank you.
Yes, I echo those comments. Yeah, it's a different position being a carer or service user rep on these boards, and I don't underestimate the challenges that it poses, and I'm very grateful to all three people for their contributions. So I don't see anybody else. It's your last chance. Okay, so we're being asked on page 45 to approve the extension of the term of office of the current service user representative on the IJB until 31st March 2021. And everybody's in agreement? Right, Alan's noted his agreement. Alan Gray's noted his agreement in the comments as well. So that's fine. We'll take that as agreed. Thank you. Okay, item 10, which is National Principles for Sustainability Payments to Social Care Providers. Sandra, is this you?
Chair, I'll introduce it, sorry. Yeah. Thanks, Chair. So the IGB report, which provides information on the development of a consistent set of principles to ensure that the social care sector remains sustainable during the emergency response to COVID-19. These principles were developed by the Chief Finance Officers and agreed by COSA leaders and Scottish Government, based on the agreement from the government that they would meet all reasonable additional provider costs as they align to mobilisation plans. These principles will apply until the end of June 2020, when they will be reviewed. It's expected that that will be extended. A reconciliation process will identify the payments which need to be made. It is proposed that these payments be funded from the £1.856 million which has been allocated initially to support social care, although this amount will be reduced by £838,000 in relation to the cost predicted to be spent over the first 3 months on additional care home capacity. In normal circumstances, we would be coming back to the IGB to seek approval to increase this amount once the funding had been confirmed. However, in this case, it's likely that funding will not be confirmed before the payments are made. Therefore, it is proposed that approval be provided for funding about the level of confirmed funding on the understanding that the Chief Finance Officer is satisfied that these costs will be recovered fully through the mobilisation plan. Just a little bit more detail about the report contained in the report are the principles which providers, integrated authorities, local authorities, care home and community-based services are required to progress. These are detailed in sections 3.2 to 3.6 of the report. One of the areas that integrated boards are to progress is to ensure that any retrospective reconciliation is completed where necessary and is done transparently and through discussion with providers. Just a little bit more detail in relation to that work. Meetings have been held between representatives of the 3 health and social care partnerships in the Grampian area with the aim of having a consistent approach to reconciliation of provider additional costs and sustainability payments. Officers have been working on a process that includes an application form, guidance for providers and a rationale for agreeing what will be paid. A joint panel is set up to determine these payments in the City and Shire. The recommendations are outlined on pages 49 and 50 of the pack. I'm happy to take any questions, and I've got colleagues available to answer any specific questions relating to finance or the work with the providers. Thank you.
I think I'll take chair's privileges and leap in first, since I don't see any hands yet, although John Tomlinson has just put one up. I'm a bit confused about the references to the 1.8 million that I understand we have already received through NHS Grampian under the NRAC rules, and additional funds through the mobilisation plan. And a recommendation C is saying we're agreeing to support payments above the level of 1.018 million. Provided the Chief Finance Officer is satisfied that the additional funding will be recovered through the mobilisation plan. Could I hear from Alex about how satisfied he is that that additional funding through the mobilisation plan is going to be available, please?
Yep, thank you, Chair. Yep, and I realise that this is slightly different approach than what we normally would have taken, because traditionally what would have happened is the government would have given us an allocation based on a formula, and then we would have spent up to that allocation or delivered on it. But the way the mobilisation plan process is working, it's slightly different in that you have to be able to kind of show your costs. So in terms of some of the stuff that we've been doing, the costs maybe have been paid to the social care providers without actually having confirmation that the funding is in place, or official confirmation like we normally would do. So what I need to do is to get confirmation from the Scottish Government that the process that we've gone through, the payments that we're going to make, are all going to be paid for by the but through the mobilisation plan, and these costs recovered to ensure that there's no impact on the IJB budget. There's a couple of little bits that you've highlighted in your response. There was £1.8 million that was put through to the partnership, and that will be getting transferred over from the NHS into the IJB budget. That's for social care. We've already committed some of that funding on the care home payment, so I had to take that off of the total amount just to make sure that we had the money for the care homes actually covered, that we had purchased additional capacity to help with surge capacity within the system through the recovery period. So I take that money off first. That leaves us with the balance, and we'll move forward from there. At the moment, we don't have a really good idea about what the costs are in regard to that, because all these costs are being incurred by the social care providers, and because in Aberdeen City the majority of the social care is externalised, it's not easy to actually figure out what level of financial deficit or financial support that these providers might require. So we're working our way through that at the moment. We sent out questionnaires to the providers to start to collate that information so that we can firm up the information that's in the mobilisation plan, and we'll be seeking to, as I say, once I get that information back, if it comes to over the £1 million that we've got available, I'll be going to the Scottish Government and requesting that they give me authorisation to pay for more than what's there, on the basis that it will be recovered from through the mobilisation plan route. I hope that gives you some assurance. And as I say, it's a slightly different situation, because normally when we get a policy commitment like this, the money comes first, and then we implement the policy, whereas in this case we're implementing the policy without having all the funding in place.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate the difficulties of the position that you, particularly you as Chief Finance Officer, find yourself in, but to be honest, we're finding ourselves in a difficult position as an IJB here, because we're basically taking it on trust that the mobilisation plan funds will be forthcoming. And I'd just like to know what your confidence level is about that. Maybe Alan Gray has a comment on this?
I have nothing further to add to what Alex already said, Sarah, so I've really nothing further that I can add to the discussion.
Right. I see Luann's hand and John Cook's hand.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm more thinking about, do we have enough capacity within our commissioning team to carry out any of the open book checks that are going to be required and the reviewing of evidence that may be required to release payments from Scottish Government? Or is that, is that well within the capacity that we've already got in our commissioning teams at the moment?
Yes, I mean, we've been working closely with the commissioning team around about that. Anne's going to be around about it too, because some of our providers split across Aberdeenshire and Aberdeen City. We're going to do it on a joint process to ensure some consistency and fairness across that approach. Some of the information within there, and a slightly nuanced, is that we'll be paying for, in terms of the occupancy on the social care providers, we'll be paying for these based on the geographical area rather than than where we commission. So if you consider that Aberdeenshire may have some people within our care homes, and we may have some people in Aberdeenshire's care homes, there's going to be a process that will need to be put through to kind of validate all of that information. So having the two of us working together will help support us in that way. It's a slightly unusual position that we find ourselves in. There have been commitments made at the highest levels about providing support to the social care providers, and really we just need to kind of work our way through that process to help support the providers who have gone through such a difficult time over the last 2 or 3 months.
Thanks. John Cook.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. So there are two potential scenarios here, are there not? Scenario one is that we put in the request to Scottish Government. Scottish Government looks at the request and comes back and says, everything is fine, we completely understand, everything you've requested is reasonable. It's all the extra spending is in line with the principles that have been agreed nationally, and we get the full amount of money. No problem. Scenario two, and it kind of, or sort of building on Luann's point, if we're not able to verify what's being spent with providers, and the Scottish Government says, actually, you haven't demonstrated that that is in line with the principles, and it may just be a capacity issue, and they then say, therefore, we're not going to give you the full amount. How are you confident that the impact on the budget would be manageable? Sorry, that's a slight, I appreciate that's a kind of how long is a piece of string question, but I think it'd be helpful if we could at least have a stab.
So yeah, I would say, and it sort of builds on the conversation we're going to have on a paper further on in the agenda. My feeling is where we've got a direct cost of COVID and we can evidence that it's been a direct cost of COVID, then that will be covered. I don't, that's the area where you'll have the most assurance from, is that you've had to put out additional payments because of COVID. You've followed the national guidelines that have been there. We will be evidencing every payment, Councillor Cook. I will not let that money go out without the evidence being there. So if there's no evidence that money's been spent, then or being, the social care providers that have had to go and pay it, then that the payments will not go out. So I can give you assurance around about that completely, that we will not be letting any money go out without having the relevant assurance in place and evidence.
Thanks. I was expecting and hoping you'd say something like that, and that's given me assurance, so thank you.
Thank you. That's given me reassurance as well. Is there anybody else? I think, Leslie, did you want to come in on this item? Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask if it was maybe possible, in order to support our position going forward, and also to support, staff that have to juggle this challenge, that maybe the board could actually write to the Scottish Government, just to, make it clear about, the difficulty that this may place us in.
What's the views on that? I'm not getting a sense from officers that is necessary at the moment. Obviously we don't want to do anything that would make it less likely that the funds would be forthcoming. I think we've heard from Alex that from our end, we're going to have evidence for expenditure before we pay money over to social care providers. And that's clearly the basis on which the Scottish Government have said that they will make the payments back through to us to reimburse us for those costs. Maybe the appropriate time to write a letter is if that agreement isn't honoured. So we have made a claim and the funds are not forthcoming. It's then it's the opportunity to write and ask for the money. I'm interested to hear other people's views on that, though. That's a personal view about tactics, I suspect, in this situation. John Tomlinson, I see your hand, and then John Cook.
Yes, I would support what you've just outlined, Chair. I mean, the dynamic of this is the providers are on the front line in care homes. That's an enormously high-profile issue, and I think we've got every confidence that our Chief Financial Officer will make sure that we've got the paperwork and it's been done robustly. So I don't think in the current situation there's too much risk that the monies won't come through, just because the need in the care homes, if that's justified, then it's really going to need to come through. So I would agree with what you've said, Chair, that only if there's an issue would we need to start to write or anything like that.
Thank you. John Cook, and then Leslie again.
I agree with you, Sarah. I suspect every IJB is having a similar conversation and a similar discussion. And I suspect that the folk at the centre know that this is the feeling. So I agree with you.
Thank you. I think nervousness about this is justified, given the huge sums of money that are the huge sums of expense that are being incurred at the moment. But it is a very unusual situation. But Leslie.
Yes, it is unusual, and I think that I'd just like to stress that this isn't about not having confidence in our officers. I've immense confidence in our officers. It's about that I have less confidence with the Scottish Government, particularly if we look at the kind of delays that we've seen, you know, like around payments to local government. So, you know, it was a suggestion really on the basis of that, but I'm happy to, you know, like wait, and if we need to write at a future point, then we can.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for making the suggestion, Leslie, so we could make our position clear on this. And I think it is very clear that if there is a problem getting reimbursement, we will be writing to the Scottish Government. Alex, when would you be proposing to come back to us to give us an update on all the money flows, the ins and outs?
Well, we discussed that in the previous. Well, there's a report going forward later on, so I would be anticipating that we'd have more clarity about the position once we get to period one and the close off there. I'm working really hard, and the team are working really hard to make sure that we get this information in from providers, because at the moment, as I say, it's really fingering in the air sort of stuff, because they're carrying these costs, and there are varying costs depending on the type of facility or type of service that they're actually running as it sits at the moment. So I feel that once I get, you know, we did actually think at one point in time about just doing this in one exercise and wait until the end of June, but I've pushed to get it done from the start of June and then a follow-up at the end of June, just to give us a little bit more assurance and allow us to feed more accurate information into the mobilisation plan. So I would say Q1, and certainly we should have once we get that response in, we should start to get a feeling from that and see where we go from there.
Right, thank you. Okay, Luann, I see your hand, and then Leslie, if you want to come back or take your hand down.
Just to say that I agree with what you're suggesting, Sarah, and to note that we now have an IJB in August and one in September, so we've plenty of times for this to be brought back if it's an issue, so we can take appropriate action at a later time. Thanks.
Thank you. I mean, I think it's important to put on record that our issue here isn't about the principle of providing sustainability payments to these providers. It's essential that we support the sector, especially given that it's one of our big strategic risks. It's just the timing of the money for it and the risk that as an IJB we have to acknowledge. But I think we have done that today, and we have got assurance about the steps that are taken to minimise that risk. Okay, the recommendations are on page 49. So we're asked to note the principles agreed nationally to support social care providers as detailed in the report. We are asked to agree to support the social care providers and fund this additional financial support from the initial mobilisation payment, to agree to support payments above the available confirmed funding level of 1.018 million, providing the Chief Finance Officer is satisfied that additional funding will be recovered through the mobilisation plan, and issue the direction detailed in the appendix to the report to the City Council to make the payments to the social care suppliers. We're all content to agree those recommendations, I take it. Right, thank you. We'll keep an eye on this going forward. Right, item 12.
Chair, just on you saying we'll keep an eye on this going forward, do you wish an additional recommendation of a report back to IJB?
No, I think that's covered later on in the item about the mobilisation plan. So we'll make sure it's
just to
clear
cover
in
off
that
here.
item.
That's fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Wilkie, I suspect this is the external audit final report.
Thank you. So this is our draft annual audit report, providing the conclusions on our audit of the financial statements. And with thanks to officers, despite working remotely entirely, we've done really well. And that work is substantially complete. And I'll just highlight a couple of areas that are ongoing at the time of presenting this. I would aim to just focus on our executive summary. So that's page 65 of the pack, or page 3 of our document. First of all, the top left box, just to confirm that I propose to issue an unqualified opinion on the financial statements. And in our strategy, we set out one significant fraud risk that's presumed to exist by audit standards in any audit around management's ability to override controls. We conducted our work with that in mind and have nothing to bring to your attention. The next 3 boxes really are quite related, but the first on the left is around financial position. And we've noted the outturn of the IJB and use of the risk fund associated with some overspend on posted services and prescribing. And we've given in the commentary our understanding that the prescribing part is largely around Brexit, and then some increased cost as we neared the year end associated with COVID-19. And we've also noted the savings target for next year in the 2021 budget pre-COVID. The 2 boxes on the right-hand side really are closely related: financial sustainability and COVID-19 impact. We are required to assess the going concern of entities in any audit for 12 months from the date of signing. And KPMG has determined that for all of our audits, there would be a rebuttable presumption that there's at least a material uncertainty in respect of going concern in all of our audit opinions. I propose to rebut this for the IJB, but that will require approval of our technical team. And that's the process that's ongoing at the time of drafting. As you can imagine, that team's very busy with a number of sign-offs all happening at once in a number of sectors. But the basis for my proposed conclusion is around Practice Note 10 on auditing the public sector, which essentially outlines that from a going concern perspective, even if a body in the public sector was to cease to exist, if the services it provides continue to be provided within the public sector boundary, then it's appropriate to prepare on a going concern basis. And that means really that more of the focus I've given in this report is around financial sustainability. And I know the paper, we're coming on to a mobilisation plan, but we have commented on it within our annual audit report. And really all I think we can do at the moment is explain the approach that's been taken by management to assessing potential scenarios, outlining those, highlighting that there does remain a risk around funding flow, touching on the point we've just spoken about in terms of timing of that and the mechanism in which funds may be received. And ultimately, we've noted the integration scheme requiring the partner bodies to meet the costs that are requisitioned by the joint board to enable it to break even if necessary. I suppose it's important that within this paper and on our page 13 or 75, We've given some insight and further commentary on our review of the management commentary, remuneration report and annual governance statement, and I'm satisfied that management have included appropriate detail of the risks and uncertainties in there. And particularly, I was pleased that officers engaged with us early on the content of the governance statement and the approach to preparing that, which has been a little different than in prior years. Also within our report, towards the end, page 77 of the pack, we give our wider scope conclusions, and those are generally satisfactory. And probably the only other thing to note is that within the appendices to our report, there are a number of confirmations that we're required to make to officers, including that we consider KPMG to be independent. So I didn't really intend to go through it in any more detail. We can take questions. The key conclusion is that we have largely completed the audit, with the exception of the final conclusion on our going concern, which I consider requires our internal technical approval, but I would expect us to progress and be able to sign.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilkie. I see John's hand and then Luann's. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I was just wanting to reconcile a couple of things in here. I understand that you've got the kind of general conclusions, but the conclusion that you have on page 80, which deals with financial sustainability, reads that the arrangements for financial sustainability have to be strengthened. So I just wondered, I understand that in a general context, but in terms of have to be strengthened, whether we've got any specifics in mind from yourself, and then that's also a question directed for Alex as well. Just at this stage, what specifics sit behind that comment?
The rationale for the comment, if I start, was just that, and we did consider that the arrangements have in the past and for the majority of the year been appropriate, but in the context of significant increasing uncertainty in terms of funding flow, then those arrangements have to be enhanced.
And I mean, I would just come in there, Chair, and just say that from my perspective, I agree with that comment, and what we're now looking at doing is to put in these arrangements, and that's what stage one of that is, that paper that's on the agenda today, to start discussing that and having a look at that information. So I think, yeah, I mean, what's happened with COVID and so on is unprecedented, but you know, we're very mindful of the financial sustainability of the IGB. And the Chief Officer and myself will be doing everything we can to make sure that we come within a balanced budget position at the end of the financial year.
Okay, could I just ask you a second question, Chair? Yeah, and that's just around the savings. I understand, you know, the position we've got of the last financial year not achieving all of our savings. And what we've got in for the next year is a higher level of savings as well, if I'm understanding this right, at 5.7. And so I'm just, do we have more confidence that we've got better methods to achieve our savings going forward compared to the past?
I'll just come in there, Michael, if that's okay. So the level has increased. I think what we've seen during last financial year, that there were some movements in some of the budgets that hadn't been predicted at the start of the year, largely around about prescribing, which is one that and the impacts of Brexit on that budget. So we've seen that coming through, and we've had to go and deal with that throughout the year, and that meant that some of the reductions in that prescribing budget that we had initially planned, because the level had been going down, didn't materialise. And I think in the other area was around about the use of agency staff and around about Woodend, and that's something that we're working on and continue to work on. And I think some of the stuff that we've done in terms of the response to COVID will help that Woodend position, because we've been working our way through that and helping to trying to alleviate that, as well as some of the work that we've been doing during the financial year. I would say that pre-COVID, I was becoming increasingly confident as confident as an accountant ever gets, that that we would have delivered on the 5.7. I could start to see the green shoots, and I was encouraged by what had happened at the end of the financial year and some of the other movements that I was seeing happening in the wider system. I think, you know, with COVID coming in, there is more of a risk around about the financial savings not being delayed, but we have added onto our mobilisation plan as it sits at the moment you know, an assessment based on where we think the financial savings may go as it sits at the moment, and that's included within the paper to further on this agenda, and is really one of the consequentials or indirect impacts of the COVID situation on us. So we are aware of that, and we're looking closely at it, and there are still things that we can do, and I would also say that there's stuff that we've done during this period that if we can replicate and embed that, then that should help with financial sustainability going forward.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful, because I think it helps us also from the committee point of view and IJB know where we need to be focusing attention as we're going forward. So I'm assured from that. Thank you.
Luann, did you want to come in here?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. This is maybe just a really daft question, but I'll just ask it anyway. So on page 68 of the report, it gives the expenditure summary, and we've known for some time that our areas of challenge and overspend are around our share of hosted services and also around care of the elderly. Am I right in thinking that Operation Home First, which we've heard about today, is really our new platform for addressing that in a different way as a whole system? That in my mind, that's what that work is about. But I just want to check that I'm right in my assumption there.
Yes, would be my answer to that. I mean, you know, what we've done over the last 3 months is remarkable in terms of the pace and the scale of change that we've made. Many of these changes will help our financial position, either consequentially or you know, because we, you know, once we embed these changes, then we'll need to, you know, see what's happening. So if I give you an example of some of the services that have moved to Wood End from the hospital to free up provision within the hospital, we would see these services as continuing within Wood End, subject to all the proper consultations and so on that need to happen in regard to that. But I think what that gives us an opportunity to do is to redesign. So what we should be seeing from that particular case is resources flowing to cover the additional cost from the acute side of things. So the additional costs will be funded because they're funded within the acute setting. But what that gives us the opportunity to do is to redesign further and have a look at what these services look like. You'll have seen through some of the work that we've been doing about looking after people in their homes, and that's looking after people in their homes without having the capacity that potentially we would have under a normal situation. So that's something else that we can be looking at, is how we can maintain people in their homes and rehabilitate them in their homes to stop them coming into the formal settings. So all that information, all that work is being processed, and that's why we're so keen to embed some of the changes that have actually come through that system, because a lot of these changes we knew about. They probably would have taken a couple of years to have put through. In normal times we were able to do it in a couple of days, and that's you know, it's really kind of just trying to embed that stuff as best we can.
Thanks.
Okay, I don't see any more hands up. That's John Tomlinson. Do you want to come back in? No. Okay. Unless we have any more questions for either Mr. Wilkie or Alex, I think I'd like to read out a comment that Angela Scott has put in the chat boxes. Angela's saying, well done to finance and external audit colleagues for getting to this point. Earlier closure is impressive in normal times, but to do it during COVID-19 makes it even more impressive. And I couldn't have put it better myself, frankly. It's an amazing piece of work, both for Alex and his team and for external audit colleagues from KPMG to turn this around so quickly in such challenging circumstances. And at least we know where our start line was for COVID. And I think we're in a better position than a lot of boards because of that, because we know exactly what we've got to deal with from March onwards. So I would fully endorse that praise. And Alex, I'd be grateful if you'd pass that back on behalf of the board back to the team. And if we could record it in the minutes as well, please, Derek. So if there's no other comments, we're just asked in the recommendations on page 59 to note the report. So we're happy to do that.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you, everybody. So we've got item 13 now, which is the audited final accounts for 2019, 2020. Over to you, Alex.
Yeah, so Chair, thanks very much, and thanks for the kind words from everybody around about that. And just to kind of express my thanks to the external auditors as well. I'm not sure if they're still on, but if they are, I was really impressed by how they managed to do this remotely, because normally it is being done with people coming into the office. So thank you to that. And as a result of that, we've got the accounts that are up for approval. They're very similar to the accounts that came before you previously in the unaudited version. And we're simply seeking for the IGB to consider these, to instruct them to be submitted to the NHS and Aberdeen City Council, and for the letter of representation as attached in Appendix B to be signed. So I'm not going to go into these in any more detail, Chair, because you've had a good look at these during the unaudited version, and I've picked up on the majority of the comments and put these through.
Okay, do we have any comments? Don't see anybody's hand up. We did have a good discussion on this at the previous meeting with the unaudited version. I did note the comments have been included, particularly the clarification about the funding for the Scottish Living Wage from the Scottish Government. Right. If nobody's got any comments, I'm happy just to move to the recommendations, actually. So the recommendations are on page 91. So we're considering and agreeing the IJB's audit accounts 2019-20 as attached as Appendix A. We're instructing officers to submit the approved audited accounts to NHS Grampian and Aberdeen City Council. And we're instructing the Chief Finance Officer to sign the representation letter as attached to Appendix B. So we're all content with that. I see some nods. That's fine. Thank you very much, everybody. Really must get a better photo taken for these kind of documents. It was taken the day of the count for the local government elections in 2017. I wasn't looking my best, I don't think. Right, I'm just scanning through my papers. I'm having the same issues as Councillor Cook about using a tablet. Right, item 14, which is the mobilisation plan and medium-term financial framework. You again, Alex.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think, I mean, we've touched on this already as we go through the agenda today, but as you can see, I've pulled together some of the information that's been presented about the mobilisation plan, and we've been very conscious about costing that plan through all the stages of the mobilisation plan and through all the additions. At present, the IGBs and the NHS don't have the certainty on the actual amount of funding to be received, and I think that's highlighted within the report. There's a process going through at a national level, and I'm a member of that group who is looking at the benchmarking and the processes that we're putting in place to validate the costs. So we're represented at a local level at that national position. We've also, as I kind of highlighted before, the direct costs, and my feeling is the direct costs will be funded because we'll be able to evidence these, and we won't be paying these out without actually having the evidence in place to allow that to be done. The riskier areas around about this are definitely in relation to the indirect costs and the consequential impact on our budgets of COVID. So as pointed out in one of the answers to the previous questions, areas such as delivery of savings, which have obviously, we've not been able to move forward our savings delivery plan as we would have liked, because we've been dealing with COVID has a risk to the organisation, and we've been very clear from the outset about including these indirect consequences within our mobilisation plan and presenting these to the Scottish Government. The medium term scenario that we've got in there reflects the mobilisation plan that we've been submitting. The costs we've included in there are for the whole year unless they're otherwise specified. And my feeling is that, you know, some of these costs we can switch off, some of these costs we can switch on, depending on what the position is with the funding as we go through this process. I think it's unlike you know some of the discussions that we've been having, and then just to pick up on some of the comment from Councillor Dunbar, certainly from my own point of view, I'm stressing to the local to the Scottish Government officials that we need more certainty around about this funding, and that you know, especially around about the indirect consequences, and I'm making that point forcefully at these meetings to make sure that to try and move that position on. But it seems unlikely that we'll get any information from them until the Q1 financial information is available, because at the moment what we've got is a selection of costs really, but we don't have any of the stuff that might be good things that might be happening within our budget as it sits at the moment, and we'll not get, certainly we won't get as an organisation information on that until we get the Q1 information coming through. But also we you know, the Scottish Government will be looking for information around about that. So I would suspect, for instance, if you had £50 million worth of additional costs and you had £50 million worth of savings, then they would net the two of these off. So there's something, you know, something around about that in terms of their process that they're looking for. And I guess I don't underestimate the scale of challenge that the Scottish Government are going through in terms of moving this through this process, because at the end of the day, this is the first time that this has ever happened, and the implications on everybody's budgets are big. But I would say that, and picking up on the comment that I made in the last paper, that there is more financial risk within our system as it sits at the moment, and that applies to all IGBs, not just our own, and also all you know, all public sector bodies. And certainly what I'm recommending is that if we don't get clarity on that financial risk within a time frame, that we notify our partners of that, and that's to help with the financial planning arrangements with one of our partners who's going to an urgent business committee on the 30th of June. The other recommendation is a recommended instruction to the Chief Officer and Chief Finance Officer. We're both very committed to balancing this budget and making sure that we deliver and protect and partners funding, and we'll start at the process of having a look at some high level options to close any funding gaps, and I've highlighted within the report some of the areas that we will be looking at, and what we've picked up on before, which is around about what does operational home first mean, what was the position at the end of the financial year, and are there any services that we won't be able to bring up in the current format due to social distancing and maybe strategic alignment. So I've highlighted some of the things that we're thinking about and it's going through our heads, but I felt it was important to bring someone forward to the IGB today just to let them see what's happening in terms of the finances with regard to the mobilisation plan. But we'd highlight we've only really got one part of the story here, and we really need to get that income figure confirmed and then firm up on the additional costs that are likely to come through, and that's certainly something that we've been working on as a system. I'm happy to take any comments.
Yeah.
I think I saw Luann first, then John Cook, John Tomlinson and Leslie.
Thanks, Chair. Questions, if I can. The first one is just, so the figure of 15 million is the where you think the spend is likely to be. Can you just sort of tell us a bit more about how much of an accurate estimate that is, and is there a risk that we might actually, our spend might go above that, or are you pretty confident that that's the ceiling of the COVID spend for this year? So that's my first question.
So it's an estimate as it sits at the moment. I can't give you any more certainty than what's there until, particularly until I see the Q1 information. But also I'm mindful of the fact that the social care providers and their sustainability, and as it sits at the moment, I've got some headline figures from them, but I need to get that built up into a whole position, and that's part of the process that we referred to in the previous report. So the figures are as best I can give you at this point in time. It could move, and we'll do everything that we can to manage against that. But I think as I say, my particular concern at the moment would be for items such as PPE and the amount that local providers were required to spend on that, and actually providing them with some funding for that.
Okay, thanks, Alex. Second question is really, as we've heard already from the accounts, pre-COVID, we knew this was going to already be a challenging year financially. So even if we get the 50 million comes through, and that's good, that's going to be non-recurring funding. So I suppose it's really important that we think very early on this year if there are savings we could make, so that we're not pushing a much bigger issue into 21-22. So just wanted to, when are you likely to be coming back to the IJB with a sort of better financial position for this year, which helps us when we're thinking a bit longer term about our budgets?
I've said within the recommendation by the second week in August is where I'll have the information collated, and I think I should have a better understanding from the Scottish Government by then about what level of funding that they're going to provide. But in the meantime, we're working on what that might look like in terms of where's our options. Obviously, some of these options feed into our longer term financial strategy, and I guess as I touched on before, we've kind of moved forward a lot of the priorities that we had within our strategic plan. So when we get to the medium-term financial framework for next financial year, we're going to have to pick up on that and see, right, where do we go from here? So at the moment, I think a lot of the stuff that we've done will work out well for us, but we need to work through that process just to embed these changes and see where we go from there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, John Cook, then John Tomlinson.
Thanks. In terms of looking at the potential savings, I totally get trying to find potential savings for Alex must be really, really hard. But on page 167 of the pack, one of the areas that we appear to be thinking about making a saving is stopping some additional mental health services. And I'm not sure where else you'd find the saving, but it's one of the things that I would not want us to be cutting back on. It's in the indirect costs at the top of page 167. Am I reading that correctly?
Yep. So I can come in there, Councillor Cook, just to give you some assurance around about that area. So what that is that's my workings around about what's in the mobilisation plan, and basically what we've put in is we put in additional mental health support and social care provision via provider. And what I'm basically saying there, could we stop or reduce it? Yeah, we could stop or reduce it if the funding wasn't available, because we would have that flexibility within there to close that. There's no decision made at the moment whether we would stop or reduce it, but I would say that if additional funding, for instance, wasn't confirmed for that particular part of the process via the Scottish Government, then that would be one of the decisions that the IJB would need to take a view on. So I'm purely there in that column, just outlining what what you could potentially do going forward, and whether I think you've got any decision that you could potentially make about these options longer term, depending on the funding. Whereas some of the costs you have no decision, because the costs are just going to flow as a result of the decisions that have already been made.
No, that's helpful. I say my only concern would be, I actually think that the mental health impact of lockdown, both in direct terms, in terms of people being isolated from friends, family, etc., is going to be huge. And I think you've also got the indirect impact of people being made redundant, which is going to increase mental health problems. And here in Aberdeen, we've got the double whammy of people being made redundant in hospitality, retail, etc., which you've got everywhere, but also we've got the downturn in the oil price. So mental health services is something that I would try and preserve at all costs, if at all possible. I get it's difficult. I get, you know, we've got to make the numbers add up, but
yeah,
just wanted to flag that it's something that I'd be really nervous about cutting or not increasing, because I think it's something that where the demand and the need is going to be greater than it was pre-COVID.
Yep. I would I think, you know, that's certainly something that we'd have to, you know, look at as we go through the process. But I think your points around about the impact on people's mental health is well made. What we are seeing is that the longer the lockdown goes on, the more people start going into a crisis kind of situation. So our teams are very closely working with individuals to try and stop people going into crisis and maintain the people's mental health. But as you know, just by the very nature of lockdown, sometimes these things, you know, need a bit of management, and that's certainly what the team are mindful of and looking to move forward on.
Okay, thanks. Shall I just ask my question? Yeah. Yeah, it's page 160, and at paragraph 310 there's the table there, and it's I just want to absolutely understand this bit. So it's, as I understand what we've been briefed, it's the indirect costs which we can expect to be something that we've got to absorb. And so it's a question, is that correct? But I'll go on, and if so, then we've got £2 million of extra costs in the financial year, and potentially that's up to 10 million, say. But even at 2 million, we're going to have then a report back in August with some detail. That's us 5 months into the year, and I'm just mindful of the lead-in time for making adjustments. So come August, we would need to address that 2 million, and it may be slightly more depending on what we're being told at that point. It's just if Alex can just say yes or no, that's the position we face.
Okay. I'd love to be able to say yes or no, John, but I think I'm not sure I can give you the sort of certainty around about that answer that you're perhaps looking for. So I would say that
I'm not looking for certainty on figures. It's more just that's where the real risk is for us.
So what I would say is kind of picking up on the paper on the previous paper, that I think that the direct costs and the costs that we can evidence, I would see there being you know, a greater chance of these being funded by the Scottish Government. The indirect costs and the consequential impacts, that's the areas where I think there's a higher risk, but I would highlight that I have been including these indirect costs within the mobilisation plan, so that you know, that they're aware that we've got these indirect costs. Now, what you've got there is a selection of indirect costs that we haven't actively tried to manage as it sits at the moment, and what we will be doing is trying to manage these indirect costs as much as we can, deliver on as many of the savings as we can, and move that sort of forward. So you've basically got the worst case scenario as it sits at the moment, and that's before Sandra and myself have been able to have a look at what we can do to try and mitigate some of that. So I think it's a good point. I think there is a bit about being able to move at pace around about this, and but then also having the certainty of the financial information, because I'm mindful at the moment that if I went and you know, brought back options sooner, that these options that may not be required, because there may be of underspends in other parts of the budgets that are still to materialise and be brought forward from there. So I am very mindful about the timing around about August, and that we will need to move at pace, and that's certainly why Sandra and myself are looking at these options as it sits at the moment, so that we can move them and implement them as quickly as possible.
Okay, thanks. That's clear. Thank you.
I'm not sure who was first between Leslie and Alan Gray, I'm afraid. So mind if I take Leslie first, Alan?
Mine's more a comment actually than a question for Alec. It's first of all just to you know, like, thank him again for his unstinted work on this whole area. But I would like to kind of register my discomfort, let's say, at the kind of risk that I feel that we're having to be exposed to at the moment, while we continue to provide, you know, like much needed services, you know, like for what is, you know, often a very, you know, what might be seen as one of the most vulnerable groups in the city. And it's really, you know, there's not a way in which there's going to be, I think, any real comfort to be brought from this until we get to the point in August, you know, where the information, you know, it's a question of really how big it is that we're having, you know, how big the sum is that we're going to have to look to find. And I suppose it's also in the light of the passing comment that Alec made about, you know, there's public services are obviously under immense pressure at the moment in terms of, you know, this level of financial risk. And I appreciate that, you know, it's not just IJBs, you know, like local government, the NHS itself as well. And again, I think that, you know, the level of exposure potentially is something that, you know, we won't have seen. And as we go through the year, it's difficult at this stage to know, you know, what may be facing us, you know, like in the winter period.
Chair, I maybe just come in there and pick up on that. I think what we find ourselves in the position of within the IJB is that, and it's highlighted in one of Sandra's comments earlier on, is that we're still within response mode, and a number of our services have you know felt the impact of COVID directly, and that's what we're trying to manage, a position of where service delivery still needs to be maintained and people are still dealing with COVID within care homes and so on, and we're trying to manage the financial position. So there is a challenge around about that as it sits at the moment, but you know, we're still very mindful of the financial position and ensuring the financial balance at the end of the financial year.
Thank you. Alan Gray, over to you.
Yeah, I'm not going to say much more than what Leslie said. Sandra, I think she articulated very well. I mean, the risks we face currently are we've got we've submitted a mobilisation plan early in the year, which had a cost attached at £15 million. As Alex sets out in his paper, the cost estimate is still around that number. And at that level, we have a Cabinet Secretary confirmation of a plan. So I think at that level, my understanding is that as long as the financial sum doesn't increase much more than that, the risk is relatively moderate, as I said, for IGB. I think the point that Leslie made was about the winter and to what extent the cost profile changes during the winter. So if that 15 million becomes 20 million, we would have a risk. So I think the next mobilisation plan, which we're due to submit, I think in July, it's really, really important that we do look at the remainder of this year. And if we believe there's any risk in addition to the £15 million already submitted, we'll probably get one last opportunity to get that on the table, so they were clear in terms of supporting critical services, vulnerable patients and residents, that there will be a cost associated with that, the IGB is looking for some support. So I think there's a bit of work to be done in the next few weeks that are quite critical to managing that risk. I think the other thing I would say in terms of looking a bit further ahead is that, you know, clearly going into COVID, we agreed a number of efficiencies that we would try to take forward. And it would be good at some point, probably around August, September, to revisit these to see whether we should move ahead with any of these or not as part of our response. Because come March next year, many of the pre-COVID issues will still be on the table. You know, the financial position won't have sorted itself out. The money will get non-recurring. And where I'd like to get ahead, I think about Alex Clements said, is what happens next year when the cost of care homes continues into next year and there's not the funding. So I think we're heading into a situation that's even more uncertain in 21-22. It'd be quite nice to, at an appropriate time, Alex, I'm not asking you to do this now, to start to just to think about the potential implications for 21-22 so that we can enter into an early discussion with our partners and for me to enter into discussion with Scottish Government around how that might be covered or funded, or whether we're on our own in that respect after the end of this financial year. So I'm not going to say anything that hasn't already been said, but and would welcome the comments from IGB members. I think everything's articulated very clearly, the risks, the uncertainty and the challenge we face. We've just got to try and work through this together. So that's all I would say, Sandra. It's more a comment rather than a question, but thanks.
No, and your comments are very welcome, reminding us of the context and the fact that COVID, as somebody once said, isn't an event, but it seems to be more of a process, doesn't it? So, does anybody else have any comments to make? Luann, do you want to come back in? No. Okay. Right. I think, Alex, I'll commend the paper because I think it sets out a very complex and risky situation very clearly, and also sets out some actions that we're going to take to continue to manage the risk here. And they're in the recommendations, which are on page 157 of the pack. So we've been asked to note the report and the estimated cost scenarios contained in paragraph 310 and the potential impact on the IJB budget if additional funding is not provided to cover these estimated costs. We're noting the additional financial risk to the IJB budget, and we're instructing the Chief Finance Officer to notify Aberdeen City Council and the NHS Grampian of the increased risk in relation to their financial exposure to funding a shortfall in the budget, subject to confirmation of funding not being received from the Scottish Government by 17th June, which is a week yesterday, and instructs the Chief Officer and Chief Finance Officer, if required, to develop options to close any financial shortfall as per the integration scheme and report these to an IJB meeting to be held by the end of the second week in August, once the Q1 financial position is finalised and there's more certainty on the Scottish Government funding levels. So this is us agreeing to hold an IJB budget no later than the end of the middle of August, as was referenced when we talked about the business planner earlier on in the agenda. So we're all content with those three recommendations? Right, okay. That's great, thank you very much. That ends the public section of the meeting, and we now have some exempt business to discuss. Derek, do you turn the recording off?
I shall do. I can confirm that there are no inappropriate people within the meeting also.
We're all highly appropriate at all times.